Today we're talking about mastering program fundamentals. All the basic stuff that as a trainer we get taught very early on in our career that has a massive role in getting the results that people are in the gym for, but unfortunately very few people are doing. We're going to take a deep dive into it today. Stick around. What's up, everyone? In case we haven't met, my name's Rad Burmeister. I'm the co-founder of Unity Gym and the co-creator of the UMS, the Unified Movement System. I'm joined by Richard, he's behind the mic, and Phil, our resident physiotherapist. We are Unity Gym, the gym that turns driven people into strong and flexible, athletic people. We do it with a really groundbreaking program that has a balance between strength, flexibility, and fitness. If you want to know how we do that, grab one of our free downloads, the Strength Blueprint, the Flexibility Blueprint, or the Nutrition Blueprint. And if you haven't done so already, come and join our Facebook group, UMS Movement Mastermind. Just join, search Facebook for it. Join, it's free. And that's where we record these podcasts live and answer your questions. How are you today, boys? How are you, Richie?
I'm really good, thank you.
Yeah. What about you, Phil?
Good. I cycled into work again for the first time since pre-COVID times. I've been...
Really?
Yeah. I've been putting it off because it's bloody cold. For us poor sensitive Sydney-siders who can't deal with anything in the teens.
Yeah. Anything below the teens,
yeah.
no, it's cold.
So, it feels good to have go back and going to build that habit again.
Yeah, so, good on you, man.
Yeah, after Yanni and I both weighed ourselves last week and realised that we're both heavier than we've ever been. I have been making good strength increases, but also want to
putting on the weight, putting on the
gains
weight.
Train.
Yeah, the gains train.
It's
not easy to do what I did, to put muscle on and not put fat on at the same time. Yeah. It's a hard thing to do. Testament to those at-home workouts, but also probably because I didn't drink alcohol or eat any sugar while I was doing it as well, so that helps as well. No, that's awesome, man. And so today was the first day cycling in?
Yeah. So back, I'm confident that I'll be every day now. It's good.
Yeah, awesome.
It's often those things where it's like, just the first time is the hardest to convince you to do it. And then when I did it, I was like, oh man, I love this. Why don't I do this every day? Way better than the bus, especially in pandemic times. yeah,
for sure. So let's get into the show. Today, what we want to talk about is that most people are training without tracking and recording their progress, which makes it very hard to predict progression. It's a really common thing that people do. Like we see it in the gym all the time, and we'll put this down as the question of the day. Let us know when you have ever done a program where you actually track and record your progress, where you're recording your sets and reps for every set, every rep, and the amount of weight you're doing, so that you can track your progress, and let us know the experience that you had with it. Did you get a positive result? Did you get a not so positive result? So we want to know. We want to know what your experience is with it. So look, the big thing is that a lot of people, they focus on the technique, they focus on the the way that they lift their weights, they focus on the exercise selection that they're doing, but they forget about these fundamental programming principles, which are really, really important. So we want to talk about first how to select and when to progress your exercises. And this is a big thing that people get wrong, isn't it, Phil? Because often people are really going to, they're jumping up the ladder way too quick. They're going to exercises that are too hard for them. So it actually took us a long time as personal trainers at Unity Gym to really understand how to, I shouldn't say at Unity Gym, I should say anywhere. I should say for a personal trainer, when you get into the industry, you learn all these exercises, but you don't necessarily know which ones should come first and why. And it takes a while to understand this, but there is a sequence that you should follow with exercise progression, and there's good reasons why, isn't there?
Yep. I think the more I have trained, and the more I've done, what are seemingly very simple exercises like squats, deadlifts, bench press, the kind of more I've realized that it's just like the devil's in the detail. Like there's so much to each of the lifts, and obviously, you can do sloppy form, that would probably be fine, but you're going to hit a wall that will either be, a plateau in strength because of a lack of movement efficiency, or you might run into an injury if you're really getting things wrong. So even with sort of simple exercises, or seemingly simple exercises, there's just so many different technique cues, so many things that you really need to master. And that can be very hard if you're training by yourself, if you're training, or even in a group class where you've got like one coach for a whole lot of different people. So unless you're getting personal training with someone who's really on you and really on it, like it's going to be very hard for you to get all that stuff right and progress appropriately. So there's ways of developing the kind of relevant movement skills that you need for each of these sort of, big showcase lifts that you can do in a simplified form. And because if you, as we've talked about before with programming principles, like complexity of movement is actually, one of the ways that we can progress, and so we can regress in the same way from those kind of big movements back to more simple movements, which will teach us the key fundamentals. So it might be, moving from, instead of a double leg squat, moving to a single leg squat, and thinking about, your knee tracking and where your, pelvis is going in relation to your knee. So we can simplify things, so we can nail those fundamental movements that then when we bring them together and progress, everything will be just right.
Yeah, I mean, you can even think of something like, if you talk about like the squat pattern and a bunch of different progressions that use the squat pattern, you can think of like a box squat where you're squatting down only to a certain height, and the box actually prevents your butt from going any lower. So as a coach, you can dictate how low you want your client to go, and there's many, many reasons why you would do this. Like knee problems would be a reason as to why you wouldn't want to necessarily squat lower than a certain point, wouldn't they? Or
yeah, well, box squats are particularly good because they teach people to sit back and use their hips more and keep their knees somewhat more vertical, because often that's a real thing that so many people sort of go very knee dominant, weight onto the toes sort of squat, and this is a great way of teaching people to sit back and use their hips a bit more. So just like you're getting out of a chair, you make that much more of a hip dominant sort of squat thing. So there's like different ways that's like a perfect way to sort of start people off in developing their hip hinge.
And then you can do something like a goblet squat where you're holding onto a kettlebell, where you start doing the full range of motion squat. So as far as the hip, knee and ankle joint are concerned, it's a very, very similar movement to a barbell back squat. It's almost identical, but it's a much easier load to control. And then moving into a back squat. But like an example of where people get this really wrong is often people go into a gym, and within their first session, I've heard stories of people going to gyms in their first sessions, they're being shown how to do Olympic lifting. In their very, very first session, and Olympic lifting is like the ultimate complexity for weightlifting movements. When you break down an Olympic lift, even if you don't even do the jerk, if you just do a clean, an Olympic clean, like the complexity of that movement is so full on. There's so much that goes on in it.
When I tried doing a bit of Olympic lifting, I was like, whoa, there is way more to this than I expected. It was crazy.
Well, we actually removed it from the program because I was doing it myself, learning from I'd watched a couple of YouTube videos and I thought I was, pretty good because I could do it without pain, and I got up to like a body weight snatch. But then when I learned from Ian King, who's a world-class strength and conditioning coach for Olympic athletes, and we were lucky enough to do a session with him, and the way that he was breaking it down for us, and he was critiquing the errors that I was doing and trying to explain to us, and all we were doing was a power clean, man, it just made me go, wow, this is something that the average person is just not ready for, and we're not going to do it anymore.
Yeah, so it becomes so important to select the right exercises so that we can get the technique right. And when you can kind of nail technique and stop thinking about it so much, you can then harness that energy and put it into the actual intensity and the intention behind the exercise, because the things that really makes you get stronger is getting the sets, reps, tempo and rest sort of right, and then progressing in a really, in a logical and progressive overload sort of way. So if you're kind of worrying about technique and not quite getting them right, then that means it's going to be really hard to get all the progressive overload principles correctly, because it's like little technique differences, say for a back squat, can have just huge differences. Like when I first started working with Sebastian Oreb to try a bit of powerlifting, like in one session, just fixing something what I was doing in my upper body meant that I added 20 kilos onto my squat. And if I'm so inaccurate with my true 1 RM from just a little technique change, then it becomes really apparent how suddenly like trying to control the variables is going to be really like impossible. So once you nail a technique, then your actual sets, reps, weight will be a true representation of your strength.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. And if we talk about knowing when to progress your exercises, there's not a one size fits all approach for this. For some people, there is a very valid reason to stay on the same exercise for 12 weeks, where you would just really work on nailing the technique on a really basic foundational movement. But generally speaking, the way that we do it in the UMS with our foundations program is that we get people for 3 to 6 weeks to stay on a certain set of exercises before they progress to the next ones. And yeah, we just take it on a case-by-case basis as to,
Yeah, because movement selection is so relevant to your goals. And, depending if someone's just going for a regular, just going through gym training because they just want to roll around a body, that's going to be quite different to someone who's really after a certain kind of athletic pursuit. So
Yeah, for sure. Now, but when we move on to this next point, this is a really important thing to understand about programming, which it adds a massive part of the results. It's a concept called periodization, which is changing loading variables like sets, reps, tempo, and rest. So sets, reps, tempo, rest, and exercise selection are the 5 periodization variables that you change in order to periodize a program. Some people say that there's 6, which would be overload technique as well. But it's at least from where I've been taught periodization, the 5 variables are the main ones that people play with. So the amount of sets that you do, the amount of reps that you do in a set, which has a direct correlation to the intensity. So when reps go down, you're not just arbitrarily dropping reps. You're saying you're doing 5 reps. That means you lift more weight. You choose a weight that you can do 5 reps on versus saying you do 10 reps. That means you do less weight. The tempo is the speed that you go through the eccentric and concentric phase, and it also refers to rests or pause between concentric and eccentric, and then rest between sets. So these things are intended to be manipulated. And they are what cause or what make up periodization, which is how you progress your programs and how you vary things. Because when you look at some of the strongest people in the world, someone like Bass, for example, the actual exercise selection that he plays around with is very minimal. He's not doing a lot of different exercises at all. He repeats the same kinds of things over and over and over again, and so do most powerlifters and weightlifters. So these things here, the rest, the sets, the tempo, the reps, those are the variables that they're really manipulating to get periodization.
Yep.
Yeah,
and frequency of how many times a week and
yeah. I mean, I guess that's rest as well. Rest isn't just between sets; it's also between workouts.
Yeah.
And when you don't understand how to use this stuff, I remember learning about periodization, and this is me as being a qualified personal trainer. So I'd done my Certificate 4 course that went for 2 or 3 months or however long it went for. I'd passed all my exams and everything, but the concept of writing a program and periodizing it, oh man, it's a lot. It's a big. There's a lot to understand, and I had to go and do several courses after my Cert 4 that were all about periodization and writing programs. And now that I've done it for so long, it's really easy. But it's quite a misunderstood thing for the average person, and you can get it really wrong really easily. It's really easy to not understand how to use this stuff. And
if we can, that can be, I guess lead to mediocre results in your everyday training, but in a sports performance perspective, this is everything. Like when you think about how a professional athlete, will have to get prepared for a tournament or a season, thinking about how you're actually periodizing your training so that you're building strength in your off season, building maybe muscle size in the off season. So you'd choose certain reps and set and tempo. You'd tweak those variables there and intensity. And then if you, and then as you go into the season, then you want to think about, okay, if it's a sport, like soccer, football, for example, they're going to need to be focusing more on running and have the time and the recovery needed so that they can, run at high intensities, be cognitively there for, skill work and all of that. And so if you didn't take your programming principles into it, and you put in a, you know, like 3RM kind of peak strength thing in at, you know, the game 7 of the season, like that's going to be absolutely catastrophic to their season, because they're not going to be fit enough. They're not going to be, you know, all their energy is going to be taken up by their lifting. So I think seeing it in a professional sports example makes it very apparent how important it is. And even if you're not in a professional sports space, even if you have, you know, maybe you do a fun run in August, like you do the City Surf every year, thinking about how you might, you know, look to program, you know, some more strength endurance towards in the lead up to that.
Yeah. And so, like, even professional, like we've worked with professional athletes at Unity Gym, and they don't even understand how to do periodized programming. They were very mystified when they were coming to us and asking us, okay, my season starts in 8 weeks. How should I train for it? And, you know, if you are somebody that competes in anything, the most grassroots level of periodizing for a season or for an event is that you work out, you know, where you want to be just before the event, and then you taper backwards to where you are, and you have a program that progressively becomes more intense or builds strength, builds fitness to about, what do you reckon, about a week out from competition, and then you take a week where you deload and allow your body to recover.
It'll depend, obviously, if it's a one-off tournament or a season, or what the kind of context is. But
and then if you're an athlete in a season, a lot of athletes, when they've asked us this, are quite shocked to hear us say that when you're actually doing your weightlifting and your training during the season, it's always at a reduced intensity or at least a reduced frequency, because just like what you said there before is really important to understand. When you're playing your sport, the high intensity is the game at the end of the week. So all your training leading up to it is to prepare you for that game. And if you're doing 3RMs during the week, the risk of injury there, you know, even just a tweak in the muscle is enough to cause you to have a lack of performance, you know, on the field. So it's a really interesting topic, and it's something that you can go really deep into, or you can go really shallow into. But if you at least start to learn some of the basics about periodization and start to build a periodized approach to your training, you're going to see some big improvements.
Or if you're completely overwhelmed by all this and it's all just seems like too hard to figure out, the great thing is that if you follow one of the programs from Unity Gym, it will always be based on a periodized. So
always, yep.
You can outsource all of that thinking.
Yeah, yeah, because it is. There's a lot to think about. There really is.
And one of the hardest things with periodization is sticking to it. I think, having setting the goal and then progressing it and doing what you said a year ago, like following that same program, 9 months later, is probably one of the hardest things, because it's very, very common for humans to be excited by the next shiny thing, novel stimulus, and then or whatever. You see a different type of exercise you want to do, or you learn something slightly different and then you change it up, and then suddenly that year-long periodization plan becomes no longer as effective as it could have been.
And if you want to know how we do this in the UMS, the most the basic approach that we have is that we first try to build foundational balanced bodies, which means a balance between strength and flexibility, a balance of symmetry from left to right side of the body, and a balance in symmetry from agonist to antagonist, which means basically opposing muscle groups, so pushing and pulling muscles. And when also a balance from upper to lower limb, so you're not top heavy or bottom heavy or whatever. Once we've gone through that foundational phase, we move into the progressions phase, which is where we start to look for a deeper level of balance, where we start looking for balance between certain strength movements and certain flexibility movements. And once we've created balance with that, then we start moving into goal-specific training, like wanting to master certain calisthenics movements or whatever it is. And it's a process. It takes time for people, but it's a really fun process. And the way we do periodization in the gym and with the UMS, once people get out of that foundations phase, is at the most basic explanation of it, we periodize between accumulation phases, where the goal is to accumulate fatigue and to build muscle, and intensification phases, where the goal is more to train the central nervous system's ability to produce strength. And those cycles go for 6 weeks. And that's a very basic understanding of or explanation of how we do it. But it works really well.
Yeah. Before we go on, just quick shout out to the people watching live.
Lucio and Lee, thanks for tuning in. But guys, we'd love to get anyone to answer the question of the day.
It's my first time posting the question.
Yeah, Phil's come on, don't let him down, man.
Exactly. So
Yeah, don't let him down. Do you track your progress? What results did you get? Have you ever done a program where you? Yeah, and how did you track it? Yeah, we'd love to hear from any of you guys out there.
Yeah.
And the last point for today is how to use a program card accurately to track your progress. And this is something that I can speak with a lot of passion about, because there's a lot of different research. I've never read the actual research papers, but I've read interpretations of them. But there's a lot of research out there that talks about people that track their progress, that track not just in fitness, in financial wealth, in business projects. When you track your progress, you get better results. Now, I went for a couple of years where I used to track my progress on a program card. Then I went for a couple of years where I didn't track it at all. And only recently, again, I started to track it, because recently, maybe a year and a half ago, I wasn't very happy with the progress that I was making. And I went back to the drawing board and I thought about all the things that I could be doing better. And one of them was I wasn't tracking my progress. And I just kept hearing it from, one of the places where I read it most recently was in the Overcoming Gravity book. Stephen Lowe, he gives examples of how gymnasts that didn't track their progress versus the gymnasts that did. The gymnasts that did made significant strength gains on the ones that didn't. And that was enough to make me go, man, I got to start doing this again. And so I started doing it, and I've made massive improvements just from doing the same training, but just tracking my progress, so that I can go into my workouts and look at what I did last week and say, okay, I'm either going to lift the same weight as I did last week because I didn't make every rep that I intended to, or I'm going to lift more because I did make every rep that I intended to. And I've gotten up to lifting more weight in certain areas of my body than I've ever done before. It's been really, really good.
Yeah.
What's your experience with it,
what
Phil?
you measure, you can manage.
Yeah.
And like objective feedback is just so important in a very subjective brain, because we're, as humans, we just are affected by so many different things in life, and obviously that can be physiological stuff and stress, where you might be extra tired from not getting enough sleep. There's lots of other stuff that's taking up your brain. But if you can have if you've measured something and you know that that's what you have to hit, then you're able, it taps into that sort of even self-competitive nature to hit those goals, and that's just so key. It also is so useful from a physio context in that often one of the biggest, the most important questions I ask during consultation is what's changed? What have you been doing over the last little time? And what was it 6 weeks ago that started this shoulder pain? And if you have a clear record of what you've been doing, then that suddenly becomes very easy, and it becomes very apparent what those changes are. So it's not always it doesn't mean that it's always a training thing, but it might be hey, you've actually been progressing your training really well, but there's something else you didn't know. Oh yeah, I did go on a 4-day kayak. It's okay, well, understanding that where the source of the change is coming from is really helpful.
Yeah, I mean, that is actually a critical thing. I mean, that's one of the things that Stephen Lowe talks about in that book as well. He doesn't just talk about making gains. He talks about when something isn't going right, a good coach will be able to look at your program card and look back to where the drop-off was, because you'll be able to see it. It's not going to be a subjective thing. It's going to be an objective drop-off in strength or whatever. And you can go, okay, well, let's look at what changed at that point to cause this. This isn't something that I recorded, but it is a great example of, because you and I were in the same room at the same time, to be able to identify a change that when I hurt my back last week, and I'm totally fine now, it only lasted for 2 or 3 days. I knew it wasn't that bad. But when you said to me, I wonder if it was the Batman, and if anybody doesn't know what we mean by that is we've got these moon boots with the hooks on them where you can hang upside down. And it feels so good on my back, on my spondylolisthesis. But I usually do it first thing in the morning, well away from my training session. And for some stupid reason, I decided to do it right before a deadlift session. I thought, I'm just going to let my back stretch out. And I just didn't click in my mind that what I was doing was a passive stretch. I was passively stretching my joints, sending a signal to my central nervous system to let everything relax and do the exact opposite of what we teach in the UMS. And then I went straight into a heavy deadlifting session and did a moderate weight for me. The week before I did 180 kilos, fine. And this week I did 140 and hurt my back. And that is an example of being able to identify a change and go, but that was because you and I were in the same room and we started talking and you straight away just went, I wonder if it was that. But if I had been tracking my progress and I came to see you 2 weeks later, you'd be able to look at that and say, oh, wow, look, that's what changed. That's probably what caused it. But if there was nothing there, you have to sit down and ask all these questions. You've got to try to remember, and it's just not so easy to do. So, yeah.
Definitely. And I guess we've got to think about, like, the reason why people don't track. And, I totally get it. One of the, having... like Rad's often set up there with his Death Star laptop on the...
I'm in here after every set. I come in on my set and I bang, bang, bang and type in my reps.
Yeah, so trying to like lower the friction to doing it, I think is a really key thing. And I know that like with, say, one of the clients that I train regularly, as like in personal training sort of settings, I often, want to be really engaged in the session, don't want to be kind of like, I just want to be totally 100% there. But I found that then, sometimes it can be a bit like, later on, you're like, I meant to write that down. What did he do? What was that? And so I've gotten the habit now. Just when he leaves, I take a photo of his setup, and so I can see all the different weights he's done, and then that will just give me that little mental jog to then go back and just note those down and put it in the spreadsheet I've got to make sure that we're progressing from there. So it's all about trying to come up with little strategies and have a like lower the friction to doing that little activity, and then once it becomes habit, it becomes easy. So
yeah. I mean, there's different ways to do it, and you've just got to figure out what works for yourself. Like in the UMS, we've got these amazing Excel SX, is that what it's called? The Microsoft spreadsheet program cards. Yeah, a spreadsheet where you can just put it in and track it all there for yourself. But some people like to print it. Some people just like the pen and paper, and that it's totally subjective. It depends. I don't think there's any right or wrong. I do like to have a digital record of program cards because I think if it's all written down, eventually you're going to lose it, and you've got to fumble through things 12 months later to find it. So I think that if you do track on a pen and paper, that later on that night, just take the 5 minutes that it would be to just quickly enter those numbers into a spreadsheet. But
you can do funky things with like visual representations of your change. If you have it all in a spreadsheet, it can make it much more sort of motivating.
Yeah, for sure.
Things like that.
So let's have a look at some of the comments here. Dave Clark, answering the question of the day, is saying, since starting the Foundations program, I've been tracking progress. It gives you an incentive to try and add 1 or 2 more reps to beat last week's results, and feels rewarding even if it's only minor progress. Well, that's it, Dave. It's all about minor progress. Like you can't once you've gone through the initial adaptations that happen from training in the first few months, you really shouldn't be expecting to have major change every week. Like to be able to go up by 2 to 3% strength in each workout is considered really good. That's good progress. And if you could do that every week on every workout, and you won't always be able to do that. You won't, like when you get up to the levels of lifting that Phil, Richard, Yanni and I do, going up in 2 to 3% every week is not always possible. So if you can do that, that's really, really good. We're talking small increments. And if you're not tracking that, it's really hard to know if you're going from 130 kilos, like to think one day I'm going to go from 130 to 140. That's a huge leap. But if you're tracking that, last week I did 130, it felt pretty good. I'm going to try 132 this week, or I'm going to try 133. Those small increments, they add up and they're manageable.
Yeah, and I think the key thing saying, it feels rewarding is just such a key one to appreciate, because, the biggest thing about staying involved in and having a healthy lifestyle that involves exercise is that you stay engaged and you stay enjoying what you're doing, and having objective feedback to show that you are making progress, that you are I guess getting better, is just one of those things that gives you that little bit of motivation and hit to come back and do it again. Because I definitely went through the phase after playing 11 years of like competitive ultimate frisbee and going to world championships and whatever. Like I played non-stop for 11 years, and it got to the point where I was like, oh man, am I better I think I was better at this when I was 18 than I am now when I'm like 27. And it's just like it kind of gets to that point where it was like when you lack that sort of objective feedback of that you're actually making progress, it can become really demoralizing and a bit like kind of really mess with your motivation. So, and I think the same thing happens in the gym, where people go to the gym for ages and they train, they have like a burst of motivation that gets them in the first place, and then they start to fade off. And I think that fade off comes when you feel like your effort doesn't like translate into a result. And so having evidence, objective evidence, is one of the most wonderful things about doing strength training, is you can get like objective evidence of your improvement. And I think that's a really powerful thing to respect about the programming card.
Oh, massive. I mean, I felt the same thing with my martial arts training. It was the same as you. It was like pretty much around that same kind of time, like started when I was about 17, when I was in my late 20s, and like, man, am I getting better at this? Or am I just like sitting here at the same kind of level? Because when you've been doing something for 10 years, the improvements start to become
seriously diminishing
small,
returns. And in sports like that, where it's hard to measure progress, it becomes very like, very hard. So
yeah, absolutely.
The last little point I want to make with the importance of tracking progress as well is when it comes to injury and pain. One thing that I find with clients who come in and they have a bit of pain and they're like, oh, this hurts while I'm doing this exercise, and then we go through how to maintain some level of training and movement, and then try to progress out of there. And if they come back like a month later and say like, oh, it's pretty good, but it still like hurts, and I'm, it's a bit frustrating that it still hurts when I'm doing this. And you look at what they were doing a month ago versus what they're doing now, and they used to be in pain when lifting an empty bar, and now they're squatting 60 kilos. Then if you can track and see like, okay, objectively, like you were doing a third of what you're doing now, that is progress. That is so important in a rehab sense, because it like rewards that effort, and it also kind of teaches your brain that the perceived threat should go down, your pain experience be less, because you trust your body more because you've got such objectively good results.
Yep, for sure.
And just quickly over to Richie. Richie was saying that this is one of the most common issues he has with people in the gym, the tracking.
Yeah, I think most people don't really understand or grasp how it is a massive fundamental when it comes to your training. Like, most people understand that they have to do the exercise correctly, like the form, the technique, to get the most out of the exercise. But you meet diminishing returns, like you guys were saying, when you do that after a while. It all becomes about the programming. It all becomes about the numbers that you do, how much volume you do, the weight that you lift, and how you progress. And when you're not recording it, it just makes it impossible to gauge that, Yeah. So, it's a really... You have to track it. You have to count it. You have to.
And I guess in the gym, like, people come in here to outsource all they're thinking about, what they're doing and how they're doing it, and then that tracking it is the one thing they actually have to take responsibility for, and that you're not going to do for them. And so I think that's a really key one too.
And I think that's where a lot of people go wrong, is that they think that when they come into the gym and they're working with the trainer, they kind of like just abdicate responsibility for everything, because the program's written for them. They're told what to do every day, but there is an element where if you really want to go to that next level, you do have to take personal responsibility for it. Yanni's saying that he needs to track his progress more. He only does it properly when he's doing his super compensation program a few times a year, and that when he was a personal trainer, he used to track every client's progress on a program card, and his clients used to get very good results. And yeah, it's true. I remember the time. So guys, look, the key insight from today's show, this is the really big take home for you. If you want to become strong, flexible, and athletic, then you must understand program fundamentals, and you need to start tracking your progress on a program card so that you can manage load. And that's what we're going to be going into much deeper in tomorrow's show. We're going to be talking about how to master load management. And one of the, there's different ways that you manage load. We've got volume and intensity. And intensity refers to, it's a direct relation to how much weight you're lifting, how intense the actual load is on your body, whereas the volume refers to the total amount of weight lifted, so the amount of sets you do or the amount of reps you do in a set. And there's different ways to manipulate the load by using different combinations of intensity and volume, which are something that a lot of people really don't understand. A lot of people really only understand the intensity variable, where it's like put more on the bar, put more on the bar, put more on the bar. Tune in tomorrow. It's going to be a great show. Thanks for everyone for tuning in today, and thanks for the feedback, and hope you all have a great day. We'll see you tomorrow.
Health is about performance, not just body image.
You better be willing to accept what you're going to have to do to get there.
We'll start focusing on movement goals, strength goals, flexibility goals.
When you nail that skill, it's there forever.
The body image goal doesn't get you that far.
It's the consistency and frequency that's going to get you there. It's not the intensity.
There's no shortcuts to mastery and movement. Destination doesn't change overnight, but your direction will.
The gym is not the place to beat up the body that you hate. It's the place to build the body that you love.
We are the gym that teaches people how to move instead of just exercise, because we believe that health is about performance, not just body image.